In the book of Revelation, it tells us about a totalitarian ruler that will come, that will seek to rule the whole world. He will do so for a short period of time, but the outcome of his actions will be devastating. God will judge the world, and the end of the age as we know it will take place. The things we are watching in the current moment serves as evidence that we are quickly entering into that time, and God tells us to fight the good fight. Here's the ultimate question. Are you willing to do for the truth what so many are willing to do for a lie? It is my prayer that the videos you watch during this time will inspire you to do what God has called you to do. We're running out of time, so let's fight the good fight. All right, folks, let's get into this. The whole reason for what we're doing today is to not only discuss what to expect when we talk about the rise of this antichrist that the Bible talks about in the book of Revelation, but it's to show everybody just how quickly we are running into that world. And we start by this article concerning the Pope and what he is doing now with Marxist groups. This is just disgusting. I'm going to read this to you and it's going to blow your mind. And then we'll get into a story about a person by the name of Gonzalo Lira, which is a name that a lot of people might not know about. He was a man who was a reporter in the Ukraine, a United States citizen that was actually killed for telling the truth. And this goes back to the whole issue related to the coming Antichrist that we've talked about. And there are so many issues, so many stories that all tie into this that we're going to get into. And folks, some of the videos you're about to watch in this particular video here is just going to break your heart. But I think it's going to open your eyes to actually see what's really going on. Now, we have to start with what the Bible tells us. When we jump into Revelation chapter 6, and we start right away in verse 2 of Revelation chapter 6, it says, I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. So this is the opening of the first seal that we read about in the book of Revelation chapter 6. And we all know that the discussion about who this rider of the white horse is pretty obvious. We are talking about the Antichrist, right? The Antichrist. And it's interesting because we know who this guy is. We know, now when we say who he is, we don't know his identity, but we know what he's all about. We know exactly what he's going to do and the things that he is going to stand for. He is going to be the epitome of all totalitarian rulers. That is in essence what he's all about. And Revelation chapter 13 goes on to tell us a lot of things about him. It says this in verse 13, it says, and he doth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men, and he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, they that should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, of course, we have spent a lot of time talking about who this totalitarian ruler is going to be all about. We've spent a lot of time talking about what he's going to stand for and the things that he is going to do. We know based on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that he is not even going to be revealed to the world until the church is actually raptured. And we know that because the Bible tells us that the church is in essence the preserving influence on this earth. We are the ones that are the gatekeepers. We are the ones that are holding these things back. And we also know about this Antichrist that he will be a secular man that has absolutely no desire for anything related to God. And we also know that he's going to be a Gentile, very likely coming out of the revived Roman Empire area. And there's a lot of passages that we can use to kind of piece this together and establish this. Revelation 17, Daniel 9 seems to imply this, and many other passages. But what's even more interesting is when he comes to do this, he will have a false prophet that will be by his side, who very likely will be one of the most influential religious people living on earth at the time, who will be supernaturally empowered to be able to deceive people into accepting this non-religious totalitarian ruler in order to accomplish the purposes that the enemy so seeks to accomplish. Now, this is interesting because we are beginning to see the implications of what it looks like when there are ungodly world leaders that begin to get involved under Marxist tenets and they begin to behave in totalitarian manners. It destroys everything around them. We've talked about this a lot. We're talking about a lot of them today. We'll be talking about one of them, Zelensky, and maybe a little bit about President Biden. He is certainly numbered amongst those types of totalitarian rulers. But we are going to look for just a second at a person that I have talked about a lot, Pope Francis, who now is in the business of not just beginning to encourage globalism and encourage a lot of the things that happen in this new world order kind of picture that we know Revelation 13 sets for us, but he is actually now encouraging Marxists to continue pursuing their own desires for what they believe will be a better world. Let me read this to you, and this is an interesting article. This article is a piece that is very, very eye-opening because of what it's telling us the Pope is actually doing and engaging in. And a lot of the opinion expressed in this article, I think, is very valid. I think it's important for us to discuss, and we'll go somewhere with this. Okay, so let me read some of this. I'll start off by telling you, and then once we read this, I'll play some of these other videos for you, which will make a lot more sense, and you'll begin to develop in your mind a better understanding of what's really happening in the world today. And we are seeing it. It is getting ugly, folks, really ugly. So the title of the article is Pope's, quote, common dreams with Marxists denies persecution nightmare. Now, this is exactly what it implies. We know that over the years, there has been a very long and well-documented history of the Catholic Church being persecuted by Marxist leaders and totalitarian rulers. And on a lot of levels, it has been very ugly, especially in the early church with earlier Roman Catholicism. And it is interesting to think about the direction that all of that has gone. Whoever thought that the same people that heavily persecuted the Catholics back in the day are the same people that the Pope is siding with today. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but let me read this to you. I'll read a few paragraphs from this. It says, in a Vatican reception on Wednesday, Pope Francis encouraged a Marxist Christian dialogue group, urging them to keep dreaming, this is their quote, keep dreaming of a better world, and to have, quote, the courage to step outside the box to, quote, create new paths for humanity through collaboration. Folks, this is no joke. He is speaking to what claims to be a Christian Marxist group. By the way, that's like saying Christian Satan worship, okay? They don't align up, okay? The tenets of Marxism deny God's existence, okay? But that's a whole other story. Let me continue to read this. It says, the Nicaraguan bishop Rolando Alvarez of Matagalpa was unavailable for comment as his country's Marxist government has thrown him in prison on trumped-up treason charges. Similarly, Chinese Bishop Peter Shao Zumin of the Zhejiang province could not be located for reaction as the communist authorities in his country hauled him to jail on January the 2nd. The author goes on to say that anybody even passingly familiar with the bloody persecution of Catholics and other Christians by communist governments should be anything but disgusted by Pope Francis's words. And he's right, okay? The author of this article goes on to say, this is personal for me. In 2020, I published Live Not by Lives, a book about the lessons we must learn from the communist persecution of Christians in the Soviet Empire. It is impossible to know for sure how many of the tens of millions of those murdered in the Soviet Union were killed primarily because they were Christian, but we do know from government documents that the Stalinist purges of 1937 to 1938 alone, 106,000 Orthodox priests were slaughtered. Throughout the Bolshevik reign of terror, all Christians, Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant under Soviet authority were viciously persecuted, with their churches often destroyed or turned into barns and storage facilities. Folks, this is documented. We know that this happened. We know this was a part of history and has happened in many other countries, not just Russia. This continued until the very end. One of the last Christian prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union, Alexander Ogornodnikov, was not set free until 1987. When I met him in Moscow in 2019, he told me a story about a sobbing elderly guard who begged him for help from the other side of the cell. The jailer was still haunted by the memories of something he witnessed in a forest clearing in the 1950s as he guarded the perimeter. The jailer said that the KGB agents organized 20 or 30 Orthodox priests in 2 rows facing the same way. One of the KGB agents walked up to the first priest in a row and asked, "Is there a God?" The priest answered yes. The secret policeman put a pistol to the priest's head and did what you would imagine. I'm not going to read this on YouTube because obviously it's brutal. And they went on executing every priest in this way. None were blindfolded. After the first killing, every other priest knew what was going to happen to him. Not one of those priests denied God. And this man wept as he finished this story. A tear ran across his cheek that was paralyzed from the beatings he suffered from Soviet jailers decades earlier. But yes, Holy Father, let us continue to dream of a better world with Marxists. And he goes on to talk about the history of Marxism and the destructive power of Marxism, and yet how absolutely reprehensible it is that the Pope is not only encouraging Marxism, but is doing everything that he can to propagate the ideals and the thoughts of Marxism, completely understanding and knowing its effects that it had on the Catholic Church. Folks, I have to tell you that this type of thing is not new to us as believers. We know that there are groups of people who claim to be Christians, who claim to be spiritual leaders, who claim to have a love for God, who continue to destroy the lives of Christians, not fully realizing the depth of damage that they're actually doing because the deception that they have allowed themselves to be given to has destroyed a lot of lives. And right now we're seeing this happening. Look, we know what's coming. We know who the final Antichrist is going to be to the rest of the world. We know what his plans are. We know exactly how he is going to affect his totalitarian reign of terror. We know all of the things that are coming, and yet we see the rise of a religious leader that is actually supporting this type of thing. He's actually looking to be in the midst of it all. He has supported the World Economic Forum. He stands with many people who literally stand against the God of heaven. He is embracing the kind of wickedness that the church has never embraced in the past. And he is even helping in the persecution of priests that have standed up for the truth. He's been a very, very ungodly man, and he continues to lead in a way that encourages terror to anybody that would stand up for truth and righteousness. And while all of this is going on, he continues to support the insane war machine that exists within Ukraine in continuing to propagandize lots of people's minds to continue to allow this war with Russia to happen instead of coming to a peaceful end. And then on top of that, he seems to be carrying a very anti-Semitic push in insisting that Israel not defend itself. This is the type of thing that you would expect, and we continue to see this happening again and again. And one of the biggest lies and one of the biggest cults that exists right now with this new war machine that we're seeing coming across the way centers around the lies of Ukraine. And we talked about this, folks. We talked about how communist and Marxist and how Nazi-based the Ukraine has been. When you start looking at Zelensky and how evil that man is, there is no stopping the kind of wickedness that that guy has continued to be given to. And it's absolutely terrible when you stop for a moment to consider just how effective he's been in the propagation and the building of this war machine. And we're going to talk about this in a second because it brings us to this story. And these are the videos that I said are going to disturb you. But listen, they're important. I want you guys to see this. This is an American journalist, and I don't believe that he's a believer. I just think he's identifying the truth. I think he sees what's happening. He sees what's truthful. He sees what's taking place, and he's calling it what it is. and he started making videos. He is a resident of Ukraine, and he started making videos critical of what the president of Ukraine was doing, understanding that he's fully corrupt, that he's a totalitarian ruler, that he has no desire whatsoever to lead anybody in a way that even remotely resembles freedom. He has killed priests in the Ukraine. He has done all kinds of other things that are just brutally wicked, and he's not allowing anybody to speak against it, right? So this guy is a reporter. He's an American citizen living in Ukraine. And let me give you an example of some of the things that he has recently said. By the way, he was arrested for his view concerning these issues, released a week later when they couldn't bring charges up against him. And then recently he was arrested again, and yet this time they killed him. And this is very, very tragic, because you're going to hear from this man's father in a portion of an interview that I'm going to show you guys with Tucker Carlson. And there's so much about this that is just so wrong. But this goes back to a very important point that I'm going to bring us home with as it relates to the coming Antichrist, right? So let's watch this. This is this man and an example of one of many videos that he has done. And hopefully this will give you a better idea where he stands. Don't mind the cigarette smoking as he's, talking. But, again, he's a different guy. But what he's saying is absolutely true. And I think it is important for us to see what's being communicated here. So let me play this so you guys understand what's going on here. Here we go.
The Russian economy is sailing on, sailing on. European economy, people are starting to die of hypothermia in the UK.
By the way, he's right about this. We talked about this, right? The Russian economy has grown as a result of the things that the world has done to Russia. And this gets very complicated because we start talking about NATO and all the other complicities that exist with the United States and standing by a very corrupt organization and all the nonsense going on. He is right about this, right? Europe has actually suffered from their decision to actually break their word concerning the expansion of NATO, and that's what's caused this problem. We'll continue on. I'll let him finish what he's going to say, and then I'll show you another video, and this is just heartbreaking. And then when you watch the interview with his father, it's just going to break your heart.
Because they don't have access to the cheap energy of Russia from before. See? And so everything that the West has thrown at the Russians has boomeranged right back at them. And so now they're panicking, and they're trying to figure out a way out of this situation. And they figure that if they throw more tanks, it'll help. It won't help. The Ukrainians, rather, they had something like 2,000 tanks before the start of this conflict. You think a couple of hundred now is going to help? I mean, why are they asking them? Because those 2,000 tanks are gone. That's basically, And so what, a couple of hundred, maybe 300 tanks, is that going to change the outcome of the conflict? No, it won't. The Russians are just going to destroy them. In the West, all of the propaganda has said that Zelensky is a hero, a Winston Churchill figure, and the Kiev regime are just angels and stuff like that. No, they're bloodthirsty murderers. The Kiev regime. I'm telling you right now.
So listen, he's not wrong. Everything that he's saying here is absolutely correct. And we've been talking about this. You're not hearing anything from him that I have not been talking about on a regular basis. This is something that we have had a regular discussion concerning. I've been able to effectively demonstrate to you the serious economic woes that the United States has created by the decision that it's made to do the things that it's doing. And we continue to see the effects of the oil energy consumption problem right now that many countries surrounding Russia has, and how the United States of America has gone from being energy independent to now begging OPEC to do some things that OPEC will actually never do because it'll never be in their best interest. So this is very interesting to see how bad things have gone and how dark our country has become and the rest of our world as a result of all of this. And I am going to venture to say that so much of this stuff has to happen, like literally has to happen in order for the things that we know about in the Bible to take place, to sort of come into fruition. Now, this does not absolve us from our responsibility of speaking against it and fighting against these things, but this is just crazy. And this man is right. I don't even know if the man is a believer. I don't think he is, but he's very astute. And he's paying attention to some things that are very real and true. Now, this is him crossing the border into Hungary, where he expresses the potential of getting arrested and thinks that if he does get arrested, he'll actually die. And by the way, he was right about this. He did get arrested, and then eventually he died a couple of days ago from the time that you're watching this recording. It's actually tragic, but watch this. This is an American reporter. He is an American citizen living in Ukraine, and the White House wants nothing to do with this. Nothing at all. So this is them basically saying you can get away with killing an American. No big deal. If you think you're safe to travel internationally as an American citizen, you're probably in more danger than the average bear. That just goes to prove how bad things are. Okay, here we go.
I will definitely be sent to a prison labor camp where I will most certainly die. And so I decided that the smart thing was take my chances in terms of getting across the border. Right now, I'm maybe 5 kilometers away from the border with Hungary. Over the last 2 days, I rode my bike just about 1,300 kilometers from Kharkov all the way here to the border. And my intention is to cross the border, get to Hungary, and in Hungary, I'm going to ask for political asylum. So either I will cross the border into Hungary in the next couple of hours, or I will be arrested again, and God knows what will happen to me.
And of course, we know what happened to him. We know that recently we have confirmation that he was actually killed in Ukraine while in custody. And it just goes to show how dark and evil and wicked all of this is. And again, this goes back to the very biblical issue that we've talked about, that as we get closer and closer to the last days, we are going to see the uprising of totalitarianism all over the place. And what used to be the gatekeepers, the United States of America, the group of people who have literally discouraged these things, we are now not only encouraging that, but we are actually building it in other countries. And not only that, but now even people who claim to be believers, the Catholic Church led by the Pope, is beginning to get behind these wicked people. Now, here's where it gets really eye-opening. I want you to pay attention to the interview with Tucker Carlson, this man's father interviewing Tucker Carlson. Now, this interview took place well before this man was killed, well before his son was killed. And it is very, very eye-opening, and it will bring us home to a conclusion that we need to discuss related to the Bible and Bible prophecy. So hold fast to this, guys. I want you to pay attention. I will stop it a few times to provide some commentary. Not much, but I think it is important for us to talk about it. So let's get over to the Tucker interview.
Mr. Leary, thanks so much for joining us. Have you heard from your son? Do you know where he is? And do you know how he's doing?
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you.
For the opportunity of saying what is going on with my son, Gonzalo. Today will mark the 7th full month that he's been arrested in Ukraine. He has not gone into trial. He's awaiting trial. He was appointed a court attorney that doesn't speak English. He's an Ukrainian attorney. Insofar as the U.S. Embassy, they haven't done a thing. Neither I nor his sister living in the USA, and I'm reading because I don't want to lose anything, neither I nor his sister living in the USA have been able to communicate with Gonzalo. He's incommunicado. The U.S. Embassy has not answered our inquiries. The embassy in Kyiv never offered a defense attorney, never visited him, except for the first time, his court appointment last November 8th.
I just want to say this is so ugly. The United States of America has chosen not to defend one of its citizens abroad, who in essence his only crime is to be an honest reporter. Folks, that's what we're dealing with here. So if you think we're in the days where the United States of America stands up for its citizens, those days are gone. That's why you have to think twice now when you do international travel. That's why you have to think twice when you go anywhere. Because the country that we are living in right now does not care about its citizens. Its citizens are a simple pawn for any kind of activity that these totalitarian rulers are given to. This is the reality of the world that we are facing right now. And by the way, this is going to become more main spread as we enter into the last days. Now, this does not absolve us from our obligation to speak out against these things and to stand up for righteousness and to seek to put people in office who will fight the good fight. But undoubtedly, these are the things that we're seeing. And as long as we're on this earth as Christians, we are the gatekeepers. And we need to start acting like the gatekeepers. This is critical. Let's continue on with this.
The embassy has just burned out Gonzalo. An American citizen by birth is in jail because he was exercising his right of freedom of speech. His defense, as I said before, is in the hands of a court-appointed Ukrainian attorney that doesn't speak any English.
An attorney, by the way, that will not appropriately and aggressively defend his client, because if he does, he himself will end up in the same jail where he will eventually lose his life. This is how it is in the Ukraine, folks. Understand that, right? To say that this is a democracy and we're fighting for freedom, no. Zelensky's a liar, and everything that we're seeing here is evidence of that.
The USA government, with its silence in the face of this scandalous incident, suggests a degree of complicity, or at least tacit approval of Gonzalo's arrest, since nothing else convincingly explains the conspicuous lack of response. Let me just read further, if I may, Tucker.
I hope you will.
Gonzalo was arrested last year on April the 15th, Good Friday, till the next Friday, 22nd, for that full week, without any charges. He was simply detained. They stole all of his equipment. He couldn't continue working after he was released for at least 2-3 weeks, trying to obtain equipment to continue. His criticism of Zelensky's Nazi regime, supported by the US government, by Mr. Biden, who makes, he is making gargles, that we have to defend democracy. What democracy? Ukraine has never had democracy, let alone today with this man Zelensky. He's a well-known dictator. They were going to have elections, Tucker, and they canceled those elections.
By the way, let me just show you very quickly a video that I did, and I'm only going to show you a small part of it, that actually shows Zelensky talking about the fact that he is canceling elections, and he has to cancel the elections because of the fact that the war has forced him to do so, and that right now he is in the business of bringing freedom back to Ukraine, which, by the way, will never happen because Ukraine has never been free, but that's exactly what's going on, and that's what he's actually referring to. I am not going to get into anything other than to simply say that the words that this man is sharing is absolutely true. Watch this video that I'm going to show you dealing with what Zelensky said. These are Zelensky's words. This is not some rumor mill. This is not, us saying, well, this is what we think happened. This is Zelensky himself telling the country what he's actually doing. So let's watch this. It's about 30, 45 seconds, and then we'll immediately get back into this interview.
Ми повинні визначитись, що зараз час оборони, час битви, від якої залежить доля держави і людей, а не час вкидів, яких від України очікує лише Росія. Я вважаю, що зараз вибори не на часі. І якщо потрібно поставити крапку у тій чи іншій політичній суперечці, і далі працювати лише у єдності, то в державі є структури, які здатні ставити крапки і давати суспільству всі необхідні відповіді, щоб не залишилось простору для конфліктів та чужої гри проти України. Моє особисте ставлення і заклик, так само, як і 24 лютого, дбати про нашу державу, про її захист, про знищення окупанта, про волю України, яка здобувається зараз в боях заради України. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає. Слава усім, хто воює і працює заради України. Слава Україні!
There it is, folks. You have it right there. This man is not exaggerating. He's not lying, okay? Zelensky is the permanent person in power, so long as the rest of the world wants him there. There's so much to say about this, folks. I'm not even going to get into the stronghold that the United States of America has in Ukraine with respect to its immense clandestine operators that exist there and the resources that they have. There's so much going on here. I'm not even going to get it. Don't even get me started on the NATO subject. This guy will. But it's just amazing. So anyway, let's continue on.
There were elections in South Vietnam in the middle of the war, Tucker, if you remember. I do remember. I lived those years in the USA. Let me say more. Last April 27th of this year, Gonzalo put on a web video, this time, and for the first time, Tucker, heavily criticizing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. 4 days later, the Zelensky police detains Gonzalo through that terrible, sinister Gestapo called SPU.
My thinking is that the Democratic Party establishment will try to get rid of Joe Biden and shoehorn in Kamala Harris. Because Kamala Harris, make no mistake about it, she's an idiot. I mean, I seriously believe that she has under 90 IQ points. I mean, she is so stupid.
If you watch the entirety of that video, by the way, it's almost like this guy is a prophet. His observations are remarkably astute. Very, very, very sharp observations. And when you watch it, I remember watching this video a long time ago. I think one of my board members had sent me this video a while ago. I want to say 6 or 7 months ago. I didn't even know who the guy was. And I just thought, wow, I have no idea how that guy continues to stay in Ukraine. He's going to die. And sure enough, I mean, I had no idea what the backstory of all of this was, but my goodness, it's just unbelievable. I mean, the United States of America has a bunch of people in Ukraine right now that can do the bidding of the president. Look, this is just so crazy, but let's continue on to see what he says.
Isn't it odd, Tucker, that 4 days later, after condemning Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Gonzalo is arrested? Why was he not detained earlier? When he was let go the previous year, May 22nd of last year, Gonzalo continued the same language, the same criticism against the war. He predicted from day one, practically, that Ukraine would never win a war against Russia. He also said, this is going to bleed the USA and the NATO countries, holding on for Ukraine to hold a battle with Russia, which will never be won. Will never be, successful. Did the State Department, Tucker, give the green light to Zelensky to put my son in jail? This is something that it is unbelievable.
I mean, the obvious conclusion is if the U.S. government is approving and maybe even encouraging what happened to your son, a man being thrown into prison to die because he criticized the regime. If they're okay with that in Ukraine, why wouldn't they be okay with that in the United States?
It's such a great question that Tucker asks. Listen to what this man's father says. It's just unbelievable. Take a listen to this.
I really don't understand. It just puzzles me. It just puzzles me also with the prompt defense or the reporter, the Wall Street Journal reporter that was detained in Russia. Well, he was really exchanging military secrets. And my goodness, the way they were defending this man, I don't even know if he's a U.S. citizen. But anyway, his name, I wrote it somewhere. Totally different to Gonzalo. No one from the U.S. Embassy is defending my son.
I'll tell you why. I'm going to make myself very, very clear. The reason why that's the case is because the reporter in Russia is going to be defended against the Russians because they don't want the Russians to be able to obtain the information that the reporter has regarding the problems that exist within Ukraine as a result of the participation of the United States in its very active clandestine operations to accomplish their wicked and evil and, yes, shall I say, demonic purposes. Folks, we are talking about a full-blown totalitarian regime that is working very, very, very hard to expand its purposes across the world in developing a new world order. That is what we are dealing with here. I need people to see this for what it is. This aligns with the scriptures. This aligns with what we understand as we get closer and closer and closer and closer to the end times. We are going to see the theater being set for all of these things to happen that we read about in the book of Revelation. This is very real, folks.
He lived in the U.S. all of his life. He's a Dartmouth graduate. I mean, he lived in the USA. He has, published Counterparts, one of his, books. He's been writing also. He's a writer. And the U.S. hasn't done anything. I cannot understand. If we're going to protect democracy in the world, let's start by taking out that puppet called Zelensky and let Congress in the USA, for crying out loud, once and for all, impeach this man. He cannot continue. The U.S. is sliding down every day, Tucker. The Chinese are winning us. I mean, what kind of foreign policy are we getting into? The worst of it all is that either they don't know history, because there are a bunch of ignorance in the White House, or they don't know. I mean, Gorbachev with Bush Sr., with President George Bush Sr., Gorbachev proposed him. We are going to dissolve the Soviet Union as such, and with it, we'll dissolve the Warsaw Pact, which was our response to NATO. But give me assurance that the countries that today belong to the Soviet Union and will be independent countries will not go into NATO. Putin, the only thing was asking Tucker was not to have Ukraine enter the NATO alliance. He didn't want to be surrounded by NATO countries, just like John Kennedy didn't want the USA to have missiles, for crying out loud, in Cuba. Putin was doing the same. The big question is, what if Ukraine had complied of not going into NATO force, alliance?
He's completely right. This whole issue that we're dealing with Russia right now, wanting to go into Ukraine and put a stop to this, is the effort for the expansion of NATO that has been very, very much propagated by people like the Biden regime and other people to want to sort of create this sort of weaponized form of infrastructure surrounding Russia so that Russia will bow down to any need or whim that the United States or any other European nation demands of it. The problem is Russia will not easily do that because they know the very second the expansion of NATO takes place, then their own sovereign ability is diminished. And if their sovereign ability is diminished, then Russia no longer exists. So you cannot blame Russia for doing what Russia did because Russia was backed into a corner. And if Zelensky wanted to end this war, he could end it literally in 5 minutes. He could literally end it in 5 minutes. And this is not wrong. This is actually what's happening. And if they were willing to say, no, we're not going into NATO, NATO is right here standing with me. They're agreeing that these are the nations that will never be able to join. We are making that promise. It will be an international crime if that takes place. Ukraine goes back to living a normal life. Russia minds its own business, and that's what happens. And some people think that my view of that is naive, but it is not naive. It's the very thing that kept Russia from going into Ukraine during the time of the Trump administration, because the Trump administration said there's no way in the world NATO is going to do it, because if NATO does it, I'm pulling my support of NATO, and we're leaving the alliance, and NATO would have never thought of doing it because we were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40% of their income. So look, this is all very obvious, and this man is educated. He's not some ignorant fool. He's a very educated man. He understands what his son was standing for. He's completely right, and this is the problem. Again, I've continued to talk about this. I say it again and again and again, but there's a bigger spiritual force involved here, and we got to pay attention to that.
Nothing would have happened. There wouldn't have been a Russian invasion. Like you said before, the U.S. is bleeding money, but it is costing a fortune. It's costing the military. It's costing more day by day. The whole population is getting involved now in the USA. There are constant protests now that we have the other problem with Israel. Where are we going to? When are we going to be the great nation we were? Or is it too late, Tucker? We have to change the government. This man cannot continue with this policy in the world. It's the wrong policy. The world is beginning to hate the USA because they see the USA and the sign is military weapons, war. Years back, the protector of the small countries, Tucker. I lived those years. Second World War, thank God for the USA. It was England's and Europe's savior. Well, what happened to that country? This that is happening to my son is a victim of this Biden government and his relation with that puppet Zelensky. Zelensky is a man that has made opponents, political opponents, disappear. Gonzalo published 2 years ago a list, I think it was 12 or 13 individuals that had disappeared. They were tortured and then, killed. And Gonzalo said, if I'm off the air for more than 24 hours, add me on the list. He's a brave man, telling the truth all along. From day one, he predicted what would happen, that Ukraine would never win a war with Russia.
This man is remarkably profound. His words are powerful, and he's right. I have to stop to simply say this. There is nothing about what this man is saying that's wrong. And this is a man who is pleading for his son, not realizing that within a month he was going to lose his son. This is so terrible.
And that the USA and NATO countries would bleed with armaments. Would support them to kingdom come. But what is the cost now? 115 billion is what I heard, at least.
I want you to get this. Know this math for just a second, okay? $150 billion divided by 330 million Americans. Ready for this? Would give each and every single man, woman, child, baby, infant, everybody, we would all have $454. $454. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, okay, the average family could walk away. Average family, $2,500. What would you do with $2,500? Let's just pretend right now. Let's just say we don't even deal with that. Let's just throw that math away. And let's just say that doesn't even mean anything, right? Let's just say bye-bye. It doesn't mean anything at all. What would $150 billion do for poverty in this country? What would $150 billion do for disease? What would $150 billion do for so many things? Folks, it would be a completely different world that we would live in. Completely, at least in the United States of America. Yet we are throwing it into another country to propagate a new Nazi regime. Think about that for a second. It's terrible.
America was a fantastic country. I want the USA to come back to be the savior of the world, to be the grandfather that helps, that is constantly watching out. Not the one who's making wars around the world, supporting dictators, cheap people like Zelensky. This is the worst, Tucker, believe me. I've read a lot about what's going on. I see bloggers like my son, the George Galloways, Christophorus. There's a whole bunch, Duran. I read, I get involved, and I've seen that we're going down. We are having terrible policies in the USA, and this cannot continue. I want you, please, Tucker, you're a man that is heard in the USA. That is power. Information is power. You have it. Make something out of this, please. As a 80-year-old father who's really fighting for his 56-year-old son, help me. Give me a hand.
He's pleading, begging for the life of his son, a son whose life was lost as a result of standing up for the truth. Here's the thing that kills me about this. We have the Bible. We have the Word of God. The Word of God tells us about what's coming. We know what the Word of God says. We know what to expect. We know what the final Antichrist is going to do. We know exactly how it's all going to formulate. Yet there are people who don't know the Lord and don't have that hope, that are willing to stand up for the truth. And even worse than that, you have people that hate God, that are willing to give their lives for a lie. Yet we as Christians will not stand up for what we know is true. I just can't get it. I've been motivated the last few weeks through the words of a man who is a Christian conservative talk show type host, who actually said that Christians who focus or who are hyper fixated on the end times prophecy doctrines are actually focusing on a demonic theology. Why does he say that? Because he says it keeps them from getting involved in the everyday issues of the nation, the politics, all those different things. And my statement is this: we fight the way we fight because we know that Christ is coming. And if we know that Christ could come at any moment, we want to be caught doing our work. We want to be caught fighting the good fight. Yes, we preach the gospel. Yes, we tell people about Jesus. That's a given. But we are also obligated by God to stand up for righteousness wherever we go, in any country, in any nation, in any city, in any community. We should be fighting the good fight. Why? Because the truth is what God calls us to stand for. Folks, I just want to explain a very important principle and remind myself of that principle. Here it is. We have an obligation given to us by God to stand up for righteousness, and it does not have a contingency placed upon it. We do not do the things that we do because we think we can make a change. It's not our job to make a change. We do the things that we do because God has called us to do those things. I'm going to tell you a problem that I have, and I'll close with this thought. I have a problem with people who say I'm making a goal. I don't have a problem with goal making. What I have a problem with is when people put a time on the specific goal that they make, thinking that an outcome is going to take place, when in reality, what they need to do is be intentional about the action. Let me explain what I mean when I say this, right? I have a goal of preaching the word of God every single time God gives me the opportunity to preach the word of God. I don't care about what else happens. If that brings in hundreds of people, great. If it brings in thousands, great. If it brings in 5, great. My goal is based on the intention to do the action. It's not based on the outcome. And I think we have gotten too caught up in being based on the outcome, or hesitating because we know what the outcome will be. We do what we do because God has told us to do it, and we need to be intentional about taking that stand. Guys, that's the whole purpose of this video, is to explain that very issue. It's critical, folks. We are in the last days, and that's what this is all about. Fight the good fight. We don't have a lot of time left. Christ could come back at any moment. We need to be caught fighting the good fight and doing the work that God calls us to do.